Welcome to another episode in a series that I'm calling Why Do I Own This?, where I take a good, hard look at my vinyl record collection and ask the questions of why I have devoted the time, money, and physical space to these musical recordings. To that end, I'm going to leave a link in the description section below to my Discogs account, where I have a pretty well up-to-date index of all of the vinyl records that I own. And you can take a look at my collection and come back, drop into the comments section below, and tell me what albums you want me to account for, especially the ones that fall outside of my usual music listening categories. My name's Adam McDormand, and this is Medium Quality. Once again, for this episode, I want to go back to the early days of my collecting, when I was just starting to build my collection, to build kind of a musical identity for these physical objects that I was going to keep. So we're looking at Naked Eye's 1983 self-titled debut album from a synth-pop kind of new wave duo. This album is probably most well known for a cover of a Burt Bacharach song called Always Something There to Remind Me, which is immediately recognizable. So much so that this album, when it was released in the United States, had the track order shuffled around. In fact, I happen to have a UK import of the original release of this album, actually titled Burning Bridges, and it had 12 songs on it. But in the wake of the top 10 Billboard chart performance of There's Always Something There to Remind Me, it was released in the United States with an alternate track list where that single was actually pushed to the top of side A, and for whatever reason the album was given an alternate album art and the title was dropped. It's just a self-titled release here in the United States. If you've only ever heard the single, I highly recommend that you go and listen to this album. I think it's fantastically cutting edge. One of the pitfalls that a lot of these early electronic and synth pop artists can fall into is that their music may not hold up over time. And I think a lot of that may be due to the fact that when you rely really heavily on musical technology that's in its infancy, as a lot of these early synths were in the early 80s, maybe those sounds don't hold up over time. But there are standout albums like this one, where the technology was used to great effect. I think this album absolutely does hold up. The songs on here are melodic and enjoyable, and I don't think it sounds like a cheap or kitschy early synth pop album. I think it actually really holds up. Go listen to a song like Promises, Promises. That song's still a banger, even in 2022. To be honest, I don't know that I miss the 2 tracks that have been dropped for the US release, because the best songs that the band maybe ever made are right here, and I highly recommend that you check these out. So the question is, how did this end up being one of the very first things that got added to my collection? Well, many years before I started collecting records, my younger brother had a pretty big collection of CDs, and he had a lot of early synth pop and some new wave music. And one of the CDs that he had was the greatest hits of Naked Eyes, which I believe actually uses the cover of the self-titled US release as the cover for that greatest hits collection. Very early on in my record collecting days, I happened to flip across this very album with its striking album art in the middle of an overpriced bin of records at a local thrift store in Kokomo, Indiana. And because this was relatively unknown, this happened to be priced reasonably, I think, and so I snatched it up. And the more I spun this record, the more I appreciated just how cutting edge these songs were. I just really think that this is an underrated album. And of course, I've been such an apologist for this album over the years that when one of my friends came across the UK release of this album, he grabbed it for me. And now I have the full track listing of Burning Bridges with this really cool album art. And I very much continue to think that this album is awesome. I highly recommend that you listen to it. Keep an eye out for it. You may come across this while you're looking through the record bins, and it's worth having. I think it's great. Anyways, that's going to do it for this episode, guys. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Until next time, guys, keep spinning that good stuff. What a time to be alive.